Well. I think it's time to say hello and a very, very good afternoon to you. If you're tuned in on Facebook or if you're watching this later, thank you for being there and engaging with this. This is, as ever, impromptu, just thoughts, what's on my mind today. And in fact, it's the last one of these lunchtime talks because in August there seem to be more things down to happen. I really hope they do. There should be workshops and travelling and people in rooms together, carefully, cautiously, maybe anxiously at times, but hopefully bathing again in the fellowship and joy of music, that fierce joy of making, which I've tried to talk about week after week, thinking always more about the process than the product. So I feel actually at this point full of gratitude for the people who have engaged here and elsewhere, who've commissioned talks, who've provided forms of online work which have kept me going and stimulated my brain and aided my bank balance. And I'm so grateful to people because a lot of lost work and sadness and anxiety for everybody, particularly, I suppose, if you're working in the arts, entertainment, hospitality, all those industries, they've been hard hit, and the uncertainty has been appalling for everybody. And there's a lot of it still to process. I think we're not through it, and we'll no doubt reflect back. But I think for me, it's been amazing to feel a lot of karma coming back from past relationships, and I'm grateful, so grateful. So we may come back once or twice. I thought what I might do is run one or two lunchtime live talks in quiet patches. So it might I'll put adverts up. I'll post it in advance, but it won't be by any means a regular thing, just infrequently. And also, I've started to think about having done all these Zoomy things, running perhaps one or two online events myself, and even some in-person events arranged myself next year, as I try to work out what this period has done to my freelance career, which of course has all been, for me, set in relief by the fact that I'd only just left my university job. So I'm going to try and invent a way of gathering names, mailing lists, and then for those occasional events, I'd certainly love to see you people either on screen or perhaps in a room together. I wonder what you're eating today. I've made myself a disgustingly strong cup of tea with a sort of slick on top, but I'm going to gamely drink it. Okay, so a nice discovery this week. My mother told me that, because we've always puzzled that there are no musical ancestors, apparently, or relatives in my family. My dad does a mean Elton John, actually, Matthew, and that's where I got that from. But in terms of sort of professional or classical music, I discovered I had a bell founding great-grandfather, a bell maker and tuner, who I imagine would have had a very refined ear and worked in Brixton. And I suppose various Kenneth Williams carry-on jokes come to mind, but let's not do those. But anyway, I think what's on my mind today then, apart from the gratitude, is this idea that we've connected and that online stuff is inadequate, but real life stuff is what we want, but it still feels a bit edgy if we're in a big group. But I think for all musicians, what they want to do, especially if they're introverted types like me, is that they want connection. And what gets in the way then is the fear of that product that they're putting, the sound or they're playing, being judged to be not up to snuff. And this then allows doubt to pour into the soul. And then of course, that then sort of impairs or destroys some of the pleasure one might have had in the activity itself. So I've been thinking a lot about perfectionism and how it's prevented me from putting writing out. It's prevented me from taking risks artistically or auditioning for things I thought were a bit too prestigious for me. And I think it's time to try harder, perhaps in a midlifey kind of way. I've got the big Harley Davidson waiting outside with the leather jacket. My resolution must be to risk more, to care a bit less about what people think about these things. I guess it means slightly lowering the standards, but to be honest, I'm not sure people would notice, in the best way and the worst way. And also to do what I'm preaching, which is, I hope the message has come consistently that I'm interested in process, not product, and act, not text. And therefore, if that's what I say to you, enjoy the play of making in the moment and forget about the judgment of the framed product at the end, then I have to practice that in my own life, which means get stuck in, be vulnerable to making mistakes, and strive and be creative, of course, which for all of us means coming up against the all too irritating inadequacies of our own skill level, our tenacity, and our brains, which obviously play those evil parrot games of undermining us as we try to achieve things. Our staying power, our energy, and our psychology all work against the thing that ostensibly we've decided we want to achieve. And that is human and also a deep struggle, I think, for a lot of people. So my resolution is to try to enjoy, relax, and be in the moment, and not to worry about the end judgment of what's coming, which hopefully, paradoxically, will result in better work. And I offer that to you as a thought because I think so many classical musicians live in their heads. They are people who have a deep emotional need to connect and to express, and they do this through the medium of music because they often perhaps find those things difficult to articulate themselves. And it may often be a formative time when it was hard for them to speak. I mean, I couldn't have talked like this to a camera when I was 18. So music's going to do that for me. And then you get stuck in that place. And then obviously with judgment and perfectionism, that erodes the pleasure and the naturalness of that act. And I think another thing I've been thinking about a lot is the way that classical musicians tend to live, therefore, in their heads. And some of the music examples that I've picked to play in the listening library, I hope you brought your cigars, is that if we try to be less in our heads and more in our bodies, like jazz musicians, like folk musicians, like people who sing while they work, most non-Western music, to be honest, but let's think in my parochial way of folk, jazz, pop, and we allow the body and the movement and the space and the ritual that actually can drive that music along and give it focus and purpose and cultural connection and meaning, humanity really, then actually we can move out of the abstract and this interiority of making and back into the world. And I also think that can help us with ego, because if you stop being in your head and allow the music to be in your body, then it's probably easier to stop intellectualizing it and wondering what people think and what it all means, and to allow the music to flow. Because a very profound feeling I've had, and I'm going to play you a few different lovely, lovely pieces to finish, is that one of the mistakes we make is to think that a lot rests on us. I mean, it clearly does. People have paid to come to a concert, or we're making a CD. It needs to be damn good, right? So I'm never denigrating preparation, practice, tuning, technique, musicianship. But I am talking about what you get once you've done those things beyond the notes. And I'm also always talking about workshop and other less formal spaces in which music can be, and which, unfortunately, in a sort of classical hierarchy, are rather devalued and denigrated. But I would say, without these roots and foundations, we don't get to the pinnacle. So from amateur and school participation, we don't have the top. And that's why the music education matter, really concerns me so much. So if we move the music out of our heads and out of symbol, conversion of symbol to sound, obeying instruction and conveying the composer's intentions, what might happen is that we can insert more of ourselves, more feeling, more naturalness, and actually allow the music to some extent, with those skill sets in place, with that work done, to allow the music to play us. And I say that because I think when you're in a big choir and you do something beautiful together, all the people who sing with you are like a crowd of witnesses, and they're experiencing the same thing. But when it's really good, you know together, but you don't need to talk about it because something electric has happened between you or in the space. And the same can be said of an audience, maybe, that they are a crowd of witnesses to an act. And if it's music rather than a reproduction of music, then it will touch them and connect them in time and space. And the thing that's amazing about that is that our job then, and this is where the ego part can go, is to be in the stream of that music, to reanimate it with our muscles and our breath and our brains and our life experience, but it's not our possession. And therefore, it is not a reflection on us so much as us joining in the stream of the making that goes across from, year to year, century to century, frankly, if you're working with very old music. So to allow the music to come out of your head and away from cymbal, and to allow it to flow through you as an act, means that you join the stream of making. And although I may be coming over as horribly pretentious or sentimental, I think for me, as someone who is over anxious and overthinking, it's very helpful to think of yourself not in some romantic sense as a mere transmitter of something greater, but actually of a perturbation, a wave in the greater making. The greatest tragedy would be for that music to die and not to be made or heard again, and not to connect. If it's good music, if it's music that tells us about the human condition or about the possibility of paradise and salvation, or how the world could be, or plumbs the depth to show us that other people have trodden the path that we may find ourselves on. All of those things are a precious gift to the musician, and the musician's joy is to impart those back, to mirror, echo, and intensify, amplify, and to let this be still in culture, alive for the next people and for the next person to encounter who needs it, which I guess is one of my feelings about accessibility. I feel that one should never dumb down too much or underplay the profundity, elitism and difficulty of some of this music that we're talking about, the more complicated polyphony or polychoral stuff. But to make sure it's vital and present in culture amid all that noise of commercialism and media, so that people, when they need it, can find it. And as you remember, my very first undergraduate wobble when I went to my tutor and said, I cannot do this, his great argument was, society needs a few people to be curating and maintaining this stuff, so it's there for everyone. When they need it, it's still there. So that's how I feel. I guess, rather emotional today, because I'm coming towards this border point where dozens and dozens of pieces of work, trips to the continent, connections and creative moments, that they all seem to be mounted up behind me. And perhaps there's this point now coming where some of those activities will resume. And I guess it'll be about, what do you think, 6 minutes before I'm in the workshop and irritated by something. Okay, so I guess someone will put their hand up and ask about ficta, and they'll do it just at the moment when you've practiced the sectional parts and you're putting the texture, and then there's, I'm sorry, no, I won't do the voice, but ask about B flat or F sharp, and then the whole grandmother's waistcoat unravels and becomes a sort of woolly bikini of a piece as the room dissolves into contention. Perhaps pronunciation could be thrown in. I mean, do make a note of these if you want to sabotage a rehearsal with me or any other conductor trying to do sort of Renaissance-y stuff. Always ask about Victor. Pronunciation is an endless fount of unanswerable controversy often, depending on who's in the room. Because even if there's a native speaker of that, unlikely with Latin, I know Dan Quayle got off the plane and arrived in Latin America and apologised for not speaking the language. But even if there's a native speaker of a European language there, we can then have an argument about historically would it have been different. And then pitch, always pitch. So, where would this have been at the time? Is this authentic? You could also send a text or a message 1 minute before the rehearsal to say that you're late or not coming at all. That's always a tremendous motivator. There are also those performative questions. I'm sure you've been in a room where people ask a question to show their knowledge. They're not really asking a question. They're telling everyone in the room about the treatise they've read or the knowledge they have about Victor or pronunciation usually. And equally, of course, there's that speciality of the Southern English, I think, of which I'm one, to ask a question to get the conductor to make a ruling about something that's annoying the person who's asking the question, but without turning to the person who's making the error and for them simply to say, you're late or flat. I mean, it's rude, but I can tell you from my experiences in Holland, in Netherlands particularly, that in the Netherlands people simply say these things to each other and it's much less of a problem socially. But I think for British and particularly English people, I think it would be considered outrageous for one singer to turn to another and say, you're flat, you're mispronouncing. So what they tend to do instead is ask the conductor, is it really an E natural there? And what they're saying is, the person next to me singing in E flat, I want you to tell them off. And you become aware of those things. So those kind of performative questions, or where you're being used in some way. And as for everything else, I mean, you get impossible acoustics, difficult lighting, temperatures you can't control, windows that need to be opened and then immediately closed. All of those things, these petty little things, are going to, I'm sure, crowd back in. I can't wait. Because, do you know what? It tells us that we're back in a room with people. And the miracle of music, I guess, is that all those people with all their neurotic tendencies or different behaviours, preoccupations, all come into a room, come into a space, and somehow they're going to align in that piece of music and make something beautiful. And for me as a conductor, there's always been this terrible fear that it's not going to work. And certainly when you start, you wave your hands and nothing happens at all, and it all seems disastrous. But actually, after a while, you realise that people want to do this. It's an open goal. Your job is to channel their energy, use time effectively, and set goals. Throw in a bit of knowledge. But that's not the most important thing for the people who've come is that they have someone clear and efficient and jolly in front of them, so that the emotional temperature of the room stays roughly level. They're a good listener. They give good feedback because singers can't hear themselves, players can't hear themselves while the music's happening. So balance, tuning, all these things need to come back. And in the end, they have some kind of vision for what they want, which hopefully is grounded in some kind of expertise. And I think it will be a joy to be back in a space with all those difficulties, with all those tangles. And as long as we've done our practice in advance, we can get beyond the notes and into the musical act. And I recommend to you that if you as a performer or as a conductor, I've got a couple watching, get into this headspace, firstly to think those slightly philosophical, maybe pretentious thoughts about being part of a stream of sound and expression. But also I've found very, very useful, as well as sitting, working on the scores and researching, so that I'm ready. So that is really reassuring if you're ready and have an idea of what you want, but also to visualize the situation in advance, to absolutely imagine yourself standing in the center of the space, running the rehearsal, and to imagine what you would like the music to sound like and how it will feel to be there. And I've found this, even taking a moment to do this, I've found this tremendously helpful. So getting out of our heads, not allowing other people's surface judgments to stop that process. Because let's be honest, there will be people who would hear me say, it's about movement, it's about ritual, it's about culture, connection, it's about physicality. And they'll be saying to themselves, this man's a joker, because what music needs is all in the score, and then it needs to be beautifully, technically reproduced. And the essence of music is to follow in that stream of excellence of making. And I guess one of the themes that's also come out of these talks is that it can be rather oppressive to learn in that culture of note-based rightness, and then for people to be critically judging those notes, like the person who sits reading the score while you're playing the symphony, or the person reading the script at the playhouse. It is not a game of catching people out and correcting them, because in the end, the work is all we have, but then all we have is the moment to connect. And slavish reproduction of the symbols is not the music, because I can go and listen to a beautifully edited CD, or I can look at a MIDI file, or I can read the score myself in silence, and that will convey the work to me. So I guess, as I'll round up now, I've got some lovely music to play you. And I'm going to post the Zoom link, so forgive me a moment while I faff about doing that. It seems to me, the work, I hope this has come over to you really loud and clear, the work is not the same as the notes, the work is not the same as the sound, and we need to detach, I think, from the primacy of symbol, and ensure that it's a living, breathing thing, an act in a space. Okay, so that genuinely was utterly unscripted, and I hope made some sense. Before I sign off, I want to just draw attention to one really lovely project, which came to my attention only yesterday, I think. Peter Leach in Somerset is doing some really interesting research on totally unknown composers. With his choir, the Constanzi Consort, he's made a film of some of that music. Particularly of Giovanni Battista Casali, who's I think 18th century composer, but also some Russian chaps. And Peter's very self-deprecating, and he said to me that he wasn't sure about the spoken bits necessarily because they're just off the cuff. Well, firstly, Peter, have you seen this? Secondly, it's great, really clear, authoritative, engaging, and music I don't know at all. And actually, he's given me permission to play one of the pieces out. So before we go into the listening library, I'd like to play one of these pieces. So this is his choir. I hope the video's working okay. Go and have a look at this. The link's in the description. And this is the Constanzi Consort. There's also, I think, a great achievement in doing this distanced, holding pitch and ensemble in. Many of you will have tried it in these difficult conditions. So here's a little extract. I realise, I think that there's a visual problem, and I'm really sorry for that. So that, I hope, only gives you more incentive to go and find that video after this talk. And also, there's a link to a fundraising page, which I'm so sorry about the visual. I just spotted the screen is absolutely blotted out. That there's a link to a fundraiser for them to make a CD. And Peter is a really fine scholar, and that's a good choir. So look, I've just posted the the Zoom link again. If you want to come and join me, please do. Otherwise, it's been so wonderful to have these connections and interesting responses coming back, and also just to practice, to have a moment to speak in some kind of coherent way for 20 to 30 minutes, quite often through the pandemic, in a time of isolation and anxiety. So I'm really grateful, and I will be back occasionally. And also that mailing list idea, I'll post something in my Facebook group page, and I'll be ever so pleased if you sign up for very occasional alerts. See some of you in a moment. Bye bye.